Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this wonderful event during Women's History Month, celebrating women's leadership. I'm Maureen Mulligan. I'm chair of the American Bar Association Commission on Women in the Profession, and I'm honored to host today, along with our ABA president, Deborah Enix-Ross, an amazing group of women leaders who, in addition to being extraordinary lawyers and judges, are each president of a national bar association. So I'm going to introduce them to you in just a moment, but first I want to take an opportunity to thank our co-sponsors from the American Bar Association, and I'm going to read them so I don't miss anyone. The ABA Judicial Division, the Coalition on Racial and Ethnic Justice, the Commission on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, the Commission on Racial and Ethnic Diversity in the Profession, the Council for Diversity in the Educational Pipeline, the Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice, and the International Law section. I want you all to know, each of you who are here today, that you're in good company as we reach maximum attendance on this platform of 500 attendees. So to all of you who are with us here today, thank you so much. And to those of you who are celebrating Ramadan, we wish you well in your celebration. So before we begin, I really agree with Deborah Enix-Ross's sentiment that it is significant for the next generation of leaders, male and female, to see this extraordinary group of women that we have here today, each of whom are at the helm of a national bar association. And I thank Deborah for bringing us all here together today. I'm going to introduce you to each of our panelists. We have Deborah Enix-Ross, who's the president of the American Bar Association, Lonita Baker, who is the president of the National Bar Association, the Honorable Toni Clarke, who's the president of the National Association of Women Judges, Lousene Hoppe, who's the president of the National LGBTQ+ Bar Association, Sandra Leung, president of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, Makalika Nahalawa, president-elect of the Native American Bar Association, and Tara Raghavan, president of the South Asian Bar Association. Before we get started and hear from the panelists, let me tell you that we're going to hear from each of them, and we'll have a Q&A session for about 10 minutes at the end. So if you have questions as we go along, please send them to the Q&A portion of the Zoom. Someone will be reviewing them and will either filter them in or refer to them at the end as necessary. So let me start off looking at my checkerboard here. Deborah Enix-Ross, can you tell us why it's important to have women, particularly women of color, in positions of leadership and power?
Well, thank you for that. And I think the answer to that is literally on the screen, right? When I look out at this screen, I guess you date yourself when I call it the Brady Bunch screen or the Hollywood Square screen. But when you look out at this remarkable group of women, you understand the power of representation. So for me, it is really important that we see this representation. We know that there are studies that indicate that when you bring women in, they bring different perspectives and approaches, and that you get better results when you have that inclusive atmosphere. So we know that. We know that women leaders sometimes have had a challenging journey, and they bring that energy and that different perspective to everything that they do. But as you said, Maureen, when I was quoted, it's really important for this generation of men and women to see us, to see how we lead, to see that we lead differently, but that together, collectively, we are helping to move the legal profession forward.
Thank you, Deborah. Lonita, would you like to comment on that same question?
Yeah, I think that President Ross stated it perfectly. It's representation matters. I think for all of us here, we've probably worked and given so much to our organizations that it only became natural that we would become the leaders of our organization. I think for women, so many times we work to make other people look good, other presidents look good, but we don't necessarily strive to become that the president or the leader of our organizations. I'm lucky that I've had a lot of people behind me, a lot of presidents that I've worked for that I helped look good in their leadership capacities, that also got behind me and pushed me to say, it had enough faith in me to say, Lonita, it's your time. You need to go ahead and run, and you deserve to be president of this organization. I think that some of the challenges that we face we are always, the people doing the work, but people don't necessarily have faith in us to lead, whether it's the stereotypical, oh, women are too emotional, or women, can't handle the large majority of the group. And I think that all of us have shown, because I know many of the women on this call and getting to know them, I know we're some fierce women, and we're knocking down those stereotypical thoughts that people have about women leaders, and we're leading our organizations to new heights.
Well, one of the things I think that happens when young lawyers see such an accomplished group of women on the screen, they think, oh, you've always been there. So I think it would be really important to talk about what was your path to leadership? What were some of the difficulties and challenges? How did you navigate that? How did you get there? And Judge Clarke, would you be willing to field that question?
Sure. First, thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. It's certainly an impressive group, and I'm going way back to Romper Room. I see the face. But yeah, well, my path sort of was parallel to my path to my legal career, or in my legal career. I was a paralegal when I started. So I worked directly with one of the partners in the firm. And he once told me that being active in bar associations is probably one of the most important things that you can do as a lawyer. Not only do you make a lot of friends, but you learn from others. And you have an opportunity to contribute to the community, not just the community, the legal community, but the community in which you live. And so I watched him be active, and I took that to heart. And so my entire professional career, in fact, I was known in the Bar Association before I became a lawyer because I was a paralegal, and I used to go to events with this particular partner. And so some of the bar associations have paralegal divisions. And so I joined those. And so, I was familiar with the bar associations in my area. I'm in Maryland, and I in Prince George's County, which is right next to Washington, D.C. There are a lot of stories that I could tell that happened along the way, some good, some not so good. But I guess I'll probably maybe save that for another question. But I would just say that I've been active for a very long time. One of my good friends who was a judge in Prince George's County, when I got appointed to the bench, my first call was from the governor, and my second call was from her, and said, you must join the National Association of Women Judges. And so I actually joined probably about a week before I actually said I do on the bench. And then I've been active not only in this bar association, but I'm past chair of the Judicial Division of the American Bar Association. And I was on the Pipeline Council. I've been very active, and I have found it to be extremely valuable. And I've made a lot of friends, and I learn about what's happening across the country, which has been helpful when I bring things back to my state.
So Makalika, can I ask you the same question? What was your path to leadership, and how did you navigate that, and everything else that goes around that?
Sure. I think I've just been incredibly fortunate in my opportunities. I I came from a very, very modest means background. I grew up in poverty. I was the first child in my family to go to college. I'm still the first lawyer in my family. And then when you look at Indigenous communities as a whole, you know, there's only about 3,500 Native lawyers across the entire country. So it's a very fortunate thing for a Native person to even be licensed to practice law. And I guess the calling, I mean, to be honest, I started out in college, you know, I admired scientists growing up, and in my house, you know, we watched movies about astronauts, and we thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to do that? And I also saw, you know, given the background and the means that my family had, and also like the trauma of my whole community over the last couple hundred years, I saw the sciences as an opportunity for me to take care of my family, build resources, and also, you know, be in this area that I had been taught to really admire. And then I went to college and I had a number of really cool experiences. I actually did get to work for a spaceflight research lab while I was there. But basically, the more I got out into the world, the more aware I became of all the injustice that honestly I probably had been experiencing in my own home, but you don't necessarily think about it when it's happening to you. And I've had that experience too as a mother. I have a 14-year-old, and there is so much as a professional. You know, someone recently asked me while interviewing for a board, you know, I get you care about all these issues, you care about Indigenous people, you care about all these other social justice topics, but do you care about women? And she just didn't see it so obviously in the work that I had done. But it's just fascinating to me to realize how I had to express that, because actually all of this work, I got more lit up into it because as I became a mother and I started realizing the things that I had to experience and overcome, and that she was going to inherit that, you know, coming up right behind me. And that's hugely inspiring. And so really like all the work in all the areas are about her and this next generation. And even before she was born, I had an opportunity. I had started work out of college before I committed to going to law school. I thought about it a little bit, but, you know, first gen, didn't know much about the legal profession. And I got an opportunity to join a tech company. And so that was more, you know, maybe intuitive, given my technical degree that I had just earned. And so when I did that, the division that I worked for got sold. And so there was a gap where I had kind of decided I want to go as a part of this acquisition and kind of basically be sold with the branch of the company I was in, or did I want to do something different? I took that chance to go work for a predominantly Black, low-income charter school in Dallas. And doing that as a teacher, again, it's like I just saw what these kids are going through. And it's funny because I probably had the same experiences, but until I saw it happening to them, I didn't have the sense of urgency. And I really can't explain why that is. Maybe it's because we're all just taught to be resilient and just like move forward, you know, and not linger on maybe the ways that we're actually being hurt. But then I think a lot of us are natural advocates, right? I mean, a lot of people are called to the law because they're natural advocates. So when you see it happening to other people, so I guess I would answer that question by saying, I mean, there's probably a lot of ways that I got there, but the thing that just sticks out to me is just like that need to do something about injustices that I was seeing were gonna just be burdened on these kids. And one of the things that I think is interesting to talk about in groups like this, where we all represent different cultures too, is how we think about reactions and women's roles in these, when you see these kinds of problems. And one of the things that I think I hear often is like, let's look to the kids, like the kids of the future, they're going to solve this, they're going to have these great ideas. But actually in my culture, that's not appropriate. It's not appropriate to burden the kids with like all of these injustices. So there's a very urgent call to action that we who are as adults and elders right now, we really tackle these problems so that they don't become their problems.
So I think that that's a really important segue into the fact that this type of dialogue and sharing experiences and how people got to where they are is so important, because it's important for both people who are in our generation and younger people to sort of see and build off of that. And so I think I'm going to ask everybody on the panel this question. Let me go next to Lousene. What was your path to leadership, and what did you find difficult? What did you find the challenges?
Yeah, so I would say a little bit ironically for me and for many LGBTQ plus law students who attended law school from like the late 90s through about 2011, my participation in the Bar Association began out of a struggle. So many of you might recall that the military had adopted a stance of don't ask, don't tell with respect to participation in the military for gays and lesbians. And there was something called the Solomon Amendment, where law schools were forced to allow military recruiters on campus to interview, despite the fact that at the time the military, that was, it was a discriminatory organization under the law school guidelines. Well, we all knew we couldn't win that battle because if the military wasn't allowed on campus, the threat was to remove all federal funding. So what we did across on campuses at the time is queer law students got together and we demanded that the law schools fund our members to attend the annual conference and career fair put on by the National LGBTQ Bar Association. So that was like sort of our form of demand for reparations for the injustice. And at that time, I had probably less than 2 dimes to scrape together. And so there was no way I was going to get to the, across the country on a plane with a hotel to attend that Bar Association event without this funding. But, when I got there, I would say I had never been in a room probably with more than 10 to 12 other LGBTQ people in my life. And to see a room full of hundreds of LGBTQ lawyers was such an, the word gets overused, but it was empowering. It was emotional. It was a very amazing experience, and it sparked a desire in me to ensure that, others who came after me would be able to experience that as well. And so that's actually sort of what initially propelled me into service for the bar and getting involved, is that I wanted to do something to sort of give back after I had had that experience in my life of being so empowered by it. And, that's, a lot of people helped me along the way. I have to say, I'm lucky. I work at a firm. It's a regional law firm in the upper Midwest, Frederickson, but my firm, didn't have a lot of experience, didn't have a ton of LGBTQ lawyers before I came along, and they supported me all along the way and have empowered me, allowed me to build up and be part of this leadership, and given me the support and backing I've needed along the way.
So one of the themes I think that I'm teasing out of all of your answers is how important it is to build relationships, and that none of us get to the point that we are in our careers or want to be in our careers without engaging others. I think that is a message that I'm hearing. Sandra, what was your path to leadership, and what were some of your challenges?
Sure. I had been involved in NAPABA as an in-house attorney for a number of years, and I spoke on a bunch of panels, went to our annual convention, but I wasn't actively involved. I joined NAPABA because it was a great networking opportunity. One of my most valuable resources in my job as general counsel of a large publicly traded company is the ability to talk to other general counsels in the NAPABA network, and just doing sanity checks, a safe place to bounce ideas and thoughts off one another. And so I really enjoyed being a part of that NAPABA in-house network and enjoyed meeting people at the annual conventions. And frankly, I didn't play a more active role in NAPABA for a while because I felt there were some things that I with respect to NAPABA, I thought it could be a more inclusive organization, and that I felt some women weren't as involved, and there were some things that happened that I wondered if it was as inclusive as it should be. And then with the pandemic and the rise of anti-Asian violence, I really wanted to do more. I was asked to consider a leadership role running for president of NAPABA. And it just came at a time where I felt that I wanted to make some changes at NAPABA. And NAPABA is a great organization, don't get me wrong, but I just thought it had an opportunity to do even more, to be a broader, inclusive organization. And that combined with the real call to action I felt with respect to addressing anti-Asian violence, I decided to participate and run for as president-elect. and it was a great decision. I've enjoyed being much more actively engaged in APABA and in the leadership role and networking with all of you on this call. And it's been, fantastic in the sense that it's I've been able to work with a broader team to focus on the needs of all our members, and women are an important part of all of our bar associations, and we need to have more voice, and that's why running for leadership positions is important. So as far as struggles that I've had in this role, there haven't been that many at all. It's been, some things have been challenging. There are so many issues that all of our bar associations are confronting and dealing with. But I think keeping a perspective on keeping the membership of your in mind, the needs of your membership in mind, being guided by the values of your organization are really important. So, that was my path to leadership at NAPABA.
Thank you, Sandra. Tara, what was your path to leadership, and what advice do you have for navigating that path for other younger lawyers who might be listening?
It's a really good question. Well, for my path, it's been up and down, and I'll be honest about this. I've been involved with the South Asian Bar Association since the start of my career in 2003. I was a part of our local chapter, SABA Chicago. At that time, it was the Indian American Bar Association of Chicago. And I rose up through the ranks of that particular chapter up until 2008 when I was president. And at that same time, I decided to be the vice president of conference, or was selected to be vice president of conference. And as a fairly young associate, maybe 4 years out of, law school, I was asked to tackle the biggest activity of our organization at that time, which was our national conference. It was in Chicago, where I'm from. And from that period, I was involved with the national organization for the next 3 years. And then I took about 11 years outside of the national organization. And I was involved kind of with the local chapter, our local chapter's foundation, and was continued to be involved with the national organization peripherally. I also had some personal challenges during that time. I had a cancer bout, so I had to address that cancer bout. And then about 10 years later, someone asked whether I would be interested in running for president-elect. And so I came back after 11 years to become the president-elect of SABA North America. And I was in a contested election with another fantastic woman. I'm not sure this is true of every bar association, but our bar association has thankfully had a lot of women in leadership positions. And I've seen that, as Lonita was talking about earlier, a lot of women take kind of subsidiary roles on bar associations, including ours. And we've luckily had support in our network to kind of push ourselves up to that president or president-elect position. In terms of challenges I had, though, is coming back after 10 years, I forgot a lot of what the Bar Association did. And the Bar Association grew immensely in that 10, 11 years where I took a hiatus. And essentially, I had to relearn the challenges of the Bar Association and take on new challenges as we've grown a lot more, and we plan to grow more. For example, we started our first ever corporate council retreat, borrowing from other organizations that have successfully done that. And so to me, the challenge was coming back after kind of a period and re-engaging. And if I were to give any advice to a young attorney who wants to do this now, is get involved as a first year or even a law student in the Bar Association and grow with it. Give yourself the chance to connect with the members of that community, because beyond being a bar association, at least for the South Asian Bar, and I'm sure it's true with every other bar, we've created a family unit, people we can connect with on a more personal level. That's not just our career, but our personal lives. And I think that is what the Bar Association has allowed me to kind of relish.
Thank you. Lonita, do you want to try that question? What was your path to leadership, and share some things with the audience?
Yeah. So my path was similar to Tara in so far as it started at the local level. I will say my first 8 years of 6 to 8 years of practicing as a lawyer, I was not actively involved in bar associations. I would go to events, but I never felt that truly included in the activities. And so whether it was our local, the Louisville Bar Association, whether it was the Kentucky Bar Association, which is mandatory, I just didn't feel that welcome. But I got to a certain point in my career that I needed to. So in law school, I was part of BALSA. I was the president of our law school's Black Law Students Association. But unlike, I know, like Hispanic National Bar Association, their student section they learn a lot about the HNBA as an organization. BALSA is not necessarily, it's a separate entity than the National Bar Association. So I didn't learn a lot about the National Bar Association when I was in law school. But I got to a point in my career where I needed community and to be around people that looked like me, and that's specifically Black lawyers, that's specifically Black women lawyers. And so I got active in our local National Bar Association chapter. I became the social chair because I've learned the term, I'm an ambivert. So I like I like to be around people, but I also like my quiet space, and my preference is to be at home, but I have a need to be around people as well. So I became the social chair. Shortly after becoming social chair, I think some of my fellow bar leaders may have similar stories. The president and vice president moved to different cities out of Louisville. And so we had openings for president, vice president. I became vice president. And shortly after I became vice president, we were voluntold that we were hosting the Region 6 meeting for the National Bar Association. So all within a matter of 2 years, it's like I'm social chair to vice president to now we're hosting the Region 6 of the National Bar Association. When the members, so the region is made up of people who are actively involved in the national organization. So when they came to Louisville for that Region 6 meeting and getting to hear so much about the National Bar Association, the president at that time, who was John Page, came. He was our keynote speaker for the conference, and just hearing about the National Bar Association, I was like, I need to see this National Bar Association. And so that was in April. I planned, like, I'm going to the convention in July in Miami, like I'm going to figure out how to get there. And when I got there, it was just seeing so many accomplished attorneys who were successful, who were doing well. I'm like, I was caught. I was immediately a lifer. I am I love this organization with all of my heart. And so, of course, my first year I didn't become in leadership, but 2 years later, after assisting with Ben Crump's campaign to become president-elect, I became it was 3 years later. 3 years later, I became his chief of communications, and I also was an affiliate representative on the board of governors. So affiliate representative, I was president. I had become president of my local chapter, and the National Bar Association includes, as part of its board, up to 7 members who are 7 affiliate chapter presidents. So I joined in that capacity, which, it's a good way to come in, because it's like no one's expecting anything of me. I only had to be elected among the other affiliate chapter presidents. And so that's how I got in and on the board. Going into a 60-person board was like, oh, wow. But I realized that my voice was needed. So I went from affiliate chapter president, representative, to regional director, to then my first bar elected position, which was member at large, to vice president, then president-elect. So I did the natural climb. Not everyone has to put in that much time, but I'm a person and I was chief of staff to Joe Drayton when he was president as well. I did that while I was a member at large. Not everyone has to do everything that I did, but I'm a person that if I'm going to take something on, I know what I'm getting into because it is a lot. Someone talked about, I think Tara said that she forgot how much there is to actually do. But when I ran, I knew what I was getting into. I was committed to making sure that I did a great job, and I'm dedicated to making sure that the National Bar Association is stronger than it's stronger when I leave than when I came in. And that's not to say that it's not a strong organization. It really is. But as someone else said, we all have challenges. One being it's a voluntary membership organization. So we have to make sure that we are a welcoming and inclusive organization for lawyers who practice in every subject area. And that's one of the things that we're always balancing. And we're also balancing not just making sure we're meeting the needs of our members, but meeting the needs of the Black community as well with everything that's going on, police violence. We see the legislation that's being passed in various states talking about critical race theory, and like those really impact our community. So just making sure that we're a voice in those avenues. And so we have to do that. And I think that Sandra talked about it. Another reason that I didn't get into leadership thinking I would one day become president. That was never my goal. It was that every time that it came, like whatever I was serving as ended, it was like, well, I'm still needed here. So I would go ahead and run. So I always went back and checked, because it was like, I would go into nominations, interviews, and they were like, oh, do you want to one day be president-elect? I'm like, no, I don't want to be president. But my organization needed me. And so, in that call to servant leadership, I did it. But as Sandra was saying, it's the women too. Like, so as Black lawyers, we're very well representative within the National Bar Association. But our first woman was elected in 1981, and that's Judge Arnett Hubbard out of Chicago. And we believe that she was not only the first woman president of the National Bar Association, but she was the first woman to serve as president of any national legal organization. So 1981, we received our first woman. Here we are in 2023, and I'm only the 15th. And so as a Black woman, I wanted to show other Black women that you too can lead this organization, So I am privileged to stand on the shoulders of a Judge Arnett Hubbard, a Paulette Brown, who served as both presidents of the National Bar Association and the American Bar Association. So as long as I have women like that to look up to, I want to be that for the women that are coming behind me as well.
Thank you, Lonita. One of our audience members wants you to explain what you meant when you said voluntold.
Voluntold. I don't think I know I did not invent the word, because I stole it from somebody, but it's when you're not necessarily volunteering. So we did not, the Region 6 director who was looking to host the conference in Louisville, Kentucky, went to a state senator who used to be an officer a long time ago, but is no longer an officer, and asked him, hey, would Louisville be willing to host the Region 6 conference? The state senator didn't check with the organization. He said, yes. And then he came back and said, oh, by the way, we're hosting the Region 6 conference. So we didn't really have a say in doing it. We were kind of told, we were volunteered by someone else. And so it became voluntold to us.
All right, thank you. So I definitely want to hear from Deborah and from Toni about your path to leadership, either in your bar association or in your professional day job, whatever you want to focus on, starting with Deborah.
Yeah, so similar stories, but to say for me, I'm first generation everything. First generation to graduate from high school, college, law school. For me, when I graduated from law school, I literally took my graduation money, bought a ticket, and went to the ABA meeting in San Francisco, because I thought in order to be a lawyer, you have to be a member of the ABA. And I wanted to be around what I thought then and believe now to be the smartest, most engaged lawyer. So that's how I ended up in the ABA. And I went straight to the international law section, which I'm proud to see was a sponsor, one of the sponsors of this event, because I wanted to practice international law. Now, at the time, I was a legal services lawyer. So making the jump from legal services to international law for most people seemed impossible. It didn't seem impossible to me. What was impossible, because if I could graduate from high school and college and law school, then nothing was impossible. That was my attitude. So I joined the international section. And I am a firm believer in getting value for my money. I paid for my ABA dues. I wanted to get the most out of it. So if there was a committee, if there was an opportunity, I volunteered, not voluntold for it, and was involved. And slowly, someone I will never forget, Rona Mears, who tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You know, one day you could chair this section." And I hadn't joined the section thinking I would chair it. And so I think these are common themes. But what I wanted to reiterate is that it's important to have mentors. And it's also important to be a mentor because she saw something in me that I didn't necessarily see. I was head down doing the work, but she encouraged me. And then along the way, I began getting more involved in other aspects of the ABA. It's a long journey, but whether it was chairing the Center for Human Rights or chairing our House of Delegates and ultimately becoming president of the ABA, it was because I thought that there was a need. And if I had a set of skills that I could use to enhance the profession that I love, and I have to tell you, I am unabashed. I love being a lawyer. It has given me a tremendous career. It has given me opportunities that I could not have imagined as a young student growing up in Harlem. So if there's anything that I can do to make sure that not only our profession is secure and solid, but is thriving, and that the next generation of young people can see it as an option for them and join us in all of the work that we do, then I'm happy to do that. Were there challenges along the way? Absolutely. And there will be challenges, and they continue to be challenges. And what I will say about being president is I hadn't anticipated what I call the 3 Ps, not the 3 Cs. People know I'm focused on that, but the 3 Ps are the people, the personalities, and the politics. And there's no getting around that, and you just have to kind of deal with it. And that's why I did say that this is a sisterhood, and to be able to call on some of you and say, this is what's going on in my association, this is what I'm dealing with. How are you dealing with that? Is really very empowering and also very comforting to know that I can have this group that I can rely on. We're facing similar challenges, and how are we dealing with them collectively? So for me, it's just been an extraordinary opportunity, and I'm trying to make the most of it with the amount of time that I have left.
Thank you, Deborah. So Judge Clarke, you've been patiently waiting. So it's wonderful that we have such a large group. It also means some people have to wait around, have a chance to speak. But what about your path to leadership? Did you want to comment on that question?
Well, I think I may have started with the question, but let me just say this after hearing everyone else. There are a couple of things that I think are, sort of uniform, and that is that you have to understand how your organization operates. National Association of Women Judges, we have 14 districts, and each district has anywhere from 2 to 4 states in the district. And that's one of the ways, a path towards leadership in National Association of Women Judges. But I think that that's something that I've heard from everyone, is that you sort of have to know your organization. The other thing is that many of us are really, if not members of, but eligible to be members of a lot of other bar associations. And so it's really hard because, I'd love to be more active in some of the other bar associations, but, you almost have to somewhat pick and maybe do one at a time, but it does really require you to sort of think about where you're going to be able to be the most helpful and useful. And I didn't go into any of this with the thought I was going to be in fact, the last thing on my mind was being president of the National Association of Women Judges, the very last thing. And in fact, for 5 years, every time it came time for nominations, I would get a call. Would you please put your name in now? And I'm like, no, no. And, you know, finally, I guess maybe in retirement, I felt like I had a little bit more time. I finished being in leadership of the Judicial Division of the American Bar Association. So I felt like, you know, even though I'm still very active, that part, that gave me some more time. I just finished being on the board of trustees of the National Judicial College. That was sort of ending. So there were, you know, some of it's a timing thing. And I think I heard that from some other folks too. So, and then the other thing that I think is really important is, and to the extent that some organizations don't have a lot of staff, but I would be completely, I won't say completely lost, but I would certainly rely a lot on the staff because they have the history, the organizational history, the continuity part that I think is often really helpful because most of us only have a year. I know some organizations is a 2-year, but most of them it's a year. So those are just some of the things that I think what I heard from, you know, sort of summarizing what I heard from or points I wanted to make from what I heard from others.
So I heard you say nobody has time to be members of all the bar associations, which I think is one of the reasons why this group that you all have formed is so powerful and so important, because even though all of you are women leaders, there are different issues that face women of color and white women and women who are at different points in their careers, women who live in one community versus another community. And so by coming together and talking about those issues, I think that in and of itself is really powerful to advance issues of the advancement of women and to address various issues of intersectionality between race, ethnicity, and gender in the profession. And so I'm actually, based upon what I'm hearing you all say, hearing what Judge Clarke said about not being able to be involved in everything, hearing what Lonita said about, you know, there are some really important specific issues to Black lawyers. I'm going to throw out a question that we didn't talk about, and so if no one wants to answer, that's okay. But the Commission on Women in the Profession has a research project called the Guided Conversations Project, and that project focuses on how white women and women of color can help each other to promote women in the profession. And it is a really interesting project that assists women in having some difficult conversations by setting up a paradigm up front that we understand that some of these conversations are going to be very difficult. You know, there are certain pressure points. And so I'd like to throw out there to this group, because it is such a diverse and powerful group. How do you think that white women and women of color can work together to advance women in the profession? If there's anyone who wants to take that question on.
Can I start?
Yes, of course you may. Go ahead, Tara.
Okay, well, we've been actually talking about this in our bar association for a long time. You know, not only we have women of color in our bar association, it's the South Asian Bar, but, you know, addressing the issue of promoting other women, period, and how to do that effectively. One thing that Deborah Enix-Ross, the fabulous Deborah Enix-Ross, mentioned was mentoring. Being a mentor and being a mentee is extremely important. But the other thing that's also important is sponsoring other women in the profession. And to advance women of color, and I, you know, will put a special highlight on, you know, Black women of color who have struggled for a very, very long time in this profession. I think that as a community, whether we're white women of color or other women of color, we need to take it upon ourselves to mentor women of color and also sponsor other women of color. And that to me is something that has to be done in order to improve our profession overall. And it's sort of a non-negotiable in my view.
Thank you, Tara. Anyone else on that topic?
Can I just, jump in if you don't mind, Maureen.
Yes,
we
absolutely.
happen to be one of those bar associations, and we're not the only one, there are others, but that sort of crosses all kinds of different lines as far as race and ethnicity, disability, and others, are all members of, also can be and are members of the LGBTQ plus bar. So our board, has made significant efforts in going back, 5, 10, 15 years now to try to increase the voice and diversity of, those who are involved in the LGBT bar and the movement in general, which had, for a long time sort of been dominated by voices that were more white gay men, to be honest. And so we've worked deliberately and hard and thoughtfully about how to promote and how to find queer Black women, queer Black men, Hispanic, all kinds of other folks who can join us on the bar and have touch points with the other community so that we can support each other and we can promote each other and we can continue. The bar to me has been an example, for instance, on our board of how when you start to get folks involved, that just, a diverse range of folks involved, that just perpetuates itself and it increases and it really helps. Now, not everybody, some of your bars are obviously focused more on a particular race or ethnicity, which makes complete and utter sense. But I think, what I've also found is that this group and many of the folks, on this call and on other calls I've had with bar leaders, we're always looking for ways and opportunities to support each other, to support each other's organizations in concerns that they have, and make sure that, the women among us, especially, to make sure that our voices are heard and that we're all promoting and connecting across bars, which I've really appreciated.
Thank you, Lousene.
If I could just add to that
yes.
as well, I believe it's said that white women have benefited the most from some of the representation goals that companies, law firms, and other organizations have established post George Floyd. And I think it's important for us to not allow us to be used as wedges against one another and think it's a zero-sum game. There's one slot and it's going to go, to one group or another. And I think just refuse, it's demanding that we expand the pie and not limit the pie and pit white women, white female lawyers against women of color, and just be very conscious of that, because I think it happens in very subtle ways and maybe intentional, maybe unintentional. But I think just having that awareness and constantly being allies with one another and promoting one another is important.
Thank you, Sandra. Did someone else want to respond to that before I move on? Lonita?
I was just going to add, I think it's incumbent to, and it's similar to what Sandra's saying, but I think it's, and Tara said it as well, to be sponsors for women of color in these positions, expand the pie definitely. But when it's not enough just to get women of color in the space. If you sit by and let microaggressions happen, they're angry or they always seem hostile. Like if you don't challenge the behavior that's happening in these spaces to create truly inclusive environments, then it doesn't do any good to bring someone into a corporation or into a law firm if the environment is such that that person is going to leave. And then what we hear law firms or corporations do is say, well, we try to hire people, but they leave. Well, did you really create an inclusive environment? And I'm sorry, we don't have the power. We don't have the numbers to push. We don't have that on our end to change, to force change. It's going to take everyone. So the sponsors, the allies, everyone to truly create an inclusive environment. So sponsoring, mentoring, great, but we have to really create and foster inclusive environments as we move forward.
And I agree with all of unsurprisingly, with all of my sisters before me. But also to add, this is actually the best part of it is that we're having the conversation. Sometimes it's very difficult to have these conversations. So that's, I talked about the 3 Ps, the 3 Cs that I focus on. Civics, civility is that second see. And that's where we learn to have difficult conversations. And then going past the conversation, it then becomes what are the actions that we're taking? And then how do we measure the impact of those actions? So Lonita is right. We've got to get people, we've got to sponsor them. And then we have to see what actions we're taking to support them. And then what is the impact of that? And once we've done that, if we see that it's not having the impact that we thought or think that it should have, then what are the adjustments that we need to make sure that we are achieving those goals?
Thank you. Any other panelists before I move on?
Can I just add that I love that President Ross said, the focus on the impact. And I think in this area, outcomes, the focus on achieving outcomes when we make partnership or when we extend allyship, I think is really important, because I think a lot of times when the trust in our communities gets undercut, it's because there is a gap between the expressed intention when we enter into spaces and we start collaborating, and then the outcomes that are achieved. And so I love that focus, because I think lawyers are just fantastic problem solvers. Women are fantastic problem solvers. Women lawyers, right? Couldn't get better. And so I think if we have a clear outcome that we're trying to achieve, we are collectively going to be very creative about how we achieve it. But I think some of the challenges that we have in this DEI space, probably across the country, but like certainly I think this can be hard in the legal profession, is we've got really good intentions, and then the outcomes are just not quite so clear. And so we don't have a meeting of the minds individually and in our coalitions and in our organizations about what those outcomes are that we are jointly contributing our energies and our platforms and all our resources to achieve. And so then, just like any other contract, right, you can foresee what's going to happen. You don't have shared view as to outcomes you're soft contracting to achieve. And then those don't get it. And then, you get disappointment, undercuts trust, and then you start to get that divisiveness, that wedgingness. So I think everything that we can do to just be really clear, and I say this, as a member of and now about to be the leader of the Native Bar, we're 560 plus separate Native communities. So, just like all of us represent communities that are not monolithic, that couldn't be more true than in the Native community. And there's, thousands of years of histories where these communities have not always even been friends, right? And so, like I always think coming into a space, even with other Indigenous Americans, it's really important that I am really clear about my intentions. Like my intentions here are good. Here's what I think I'm here to do. Here's what I'm about, right? So that's actually also really important. So I don't want to undercut that, because the relationships are key, and that's how you build a trusting relationship. But then you really got to be clear about what those outcomes are that you're asking everybody to buy into, and then hold yourself accountable to what you have contributed to achieving or not achieving those.
And I think that's right. And I think holding people accountable means that it's really important to collect data as to what the outcomes are, because then you begin to develop a data-driven narrative and not a narrative that is just created by anecdotes, which is really important, I think, to get to what's actually happening. So I really like what you have to say there. So it's not time for questions yet, but I have been looking at the questions in the chat, and a lot of them focus around one issue. So, and that is, and you all talked about it earlier when we got together, and that is that sometimes in your role as the leader of a bar association, or in your role as a lawyer, whatever role you have for your job that you do every day, as a leader, how do you either separate your personal beliefs in light of your fiduciary position, or remain true to your authentic self when you're also representing a larger group? And I know, Sandra, you might you have to drop off a little early, so I'm going to start with you so you have the opportunity to comment on that. And you're on mute.
I'm on mute. Can you just briefly restate what the question is? I just got to.
Absolutely. How do you separate your personal beliefs in light of your fiduciary position and still remain authentic to yourself and be able to sufficiently and adequately represent your organization, which might have a different position than you
Yeah,
do?
it's a great question. And I think we all struggle with this, particularly with so many things going on now today on the social arena and political arena, and things come up all the time. Particularly with recent Supreme Court decisions. So it's a really good question. And what I look to is I fully understand my obligations as fiduciary of my organization, and I will conduct myself in a way that's consistent with the values of that organization. And that's my obligation. But I'm not someone who can cut it off completely outside of my responsibilities for the organization. I would always make the disclaimers, of course, that I'm speaking in my personal capacity and not as a representative either of my employer or of the organization in which I hold a leadership position, but express my viewpoints there either. But I think it's very important to always speak through and carry through the values of your organization, particularly if you're the leader of the organization.
Okay. Let's see, who have I not heard from recently? Tara?
I think Sandra makes a really, really good point. Usually, at least most national bar associations that I've been helped with or have connected with along these lines have kind of basic tenets that you have to follow. Whether you believe it or not, there's just certain rules that you have. As an example, every year we authorize what we're going to advocate on behalf of our top initiatives. And for the South Asian Bar, invariably, it has to do with immigration issues, diversity issues, obviously. But, we've added on in the last year voting rights as well as women's reproductive rights. And when we made the decision to go through with evaluating women's reproductive rights, it was a tough decision to support because we have people on both sides of the positions on abortion. And so when we were kind of connecting on this issue, we had to get authorization. And the way our organization works, we're an organization where our members are our chapters. We had to get authorization from our board members, which include our chapter presidents, as well as our executive committee. And in order to ensure that we were taking the right step, we got that authorization through a board vote. And so I think as we go through this, there's times that we're going to see that we are not in agreement with necessarily the kind of the path that is being taken for the particular bar association. But we have to set that aside, and that can be a struggle. But if you go through the protocol that your organization has set up, or at least you hopefully have set up, then at least you have the backing for whatever you've done. So I think that to me is the way that you navigate that difficult issue of your personal views versus your, fiduciary duty.
Judge Clarke, did you want to comment on that?
Well, that's what judges do. That's what we're trained to do. That's what we're told to do. That's when we take the oath. That is sort of, in our DNA, if you will. So we, the longer you're on the bench, the more issues come up that you, from a professional standpoint, cannot comment on, and really from a personal standpoint, you cannot comment on. And so we communicate with other organizations and work with other organizations who can speak out. The judicial division of the ABA has a lawyers conference within the judicial division. And one of the things that we rely on the lawyers in the lawyers conference is when issues come up that judges can't address. And it would not necessarily be a Supreme Court decision or, any kind of decision, because we really can't comment on that. But when the judiciary comes under attack, we can't really defend ourselves. a really good friend of mine, federal judge, when he stopped being senior status and he just completely retired, he said, I got all my rights back now. Now I can talk. And he does. But that's one of the things that, you know, we struggle with, is because we can't defend ourselves. Within the National Association of Women Judges, we had a lot of women judges come under attack. This was about maybe 6 years ago. And as a collectively, people, and they had elections, you know, they were elected judgeships, but the sitting judges couldn't comment on things. And so we created a video. We created a committee within a committee, a subcommittee that's entitled the Informed Voters Project. And they created a video that we were able to get out in the community that just educated the community on, you know, what judges do and how judges are, you know, how they're either elected or appointed, and the things that, because of our code of judicial conduct, we cannot comment on. And so that kind of educated the public who otherwise were getting very negative information from, you know, from commercials that were created by people running against sitting judges, and sitting judges couldn't comment, but the people running against them, you know, were attacking them. So these are some of the things that we've tried to do to sort of combat certain issues. Obviously, we can't, you know, comment on decisions of other courts. I personally have a lot of opinions about them, but I can't tell you what they are. And so there are other ways of assisting our sister judges across the country that, you know, we can't specifically comment on certain things, but things like the Informed Voters Project, or within the judicial division, having the lawyers conference speak out on issues. Those are the ways that we have a resource board within the National Association of Women Judges who are lawyers, and so on occasions they may sort of speak out on some issues that we really can't address directly. It's a little bit more challenging for us, and so we appreciate when the lawyers in the community speak out about issues. You know, there were a lot of things. You know, our members were like, "Can't we put out something like President Enix-Ross did?" I'm like, "No, we can't." You know, so but we are appreciative and grateful for you know, other associations taking a stance, and so that was all I wanted to sort of add to the conversation.
Thank you.
Could I just piggyback on that then?
Absolutely.
So with the ABA, the president cannot speak unless there's ABA policy, and the policy is adopted by the House of Delegates. So on the one hand, I might have lots of views. We have media training when you're becoming the president, which, you know, sometimes takes for some presidents, and for other presidents not so well. But and they tell you have no opinions for the year that you're president. In fact, it is suggested that even as your president-elect, you don't contribute to political campaigns because you're taking on this role, and you need to be neutral and only speak when we have policy. Now, once we have ABA policy, then it becomes the judgment of the ABA president on when to issue a statement, how to issue it, what the tone is. So there you have a bit more influence, shall we say, on what you say and when to say it. And I have found that to be one of the more challenging yet rewarding aspects of being president, is when I might issue a statement, kind of crafting that and thinking about what kind of impact do I want it to have? Because what you don't want is to dilute the voice of your association. You want to weigh in where it will be most impactful and where you will feel that you are making a difference. So I've tried to do that with the various statements that we have made, but that has been really a very challenging and exciting part of the job. But it all begins with what do we, whether or not we have policy. And even when we do have policy, as some of my sisters here have said, sometimes it's controversial. And when we pass a resolution, there will be people who are saying, why are you wading into that issue? That's a political issue, or that's a divisive issue. But we rely on our almost 600 members of our House to bring those resolutions. And if they're passed, then that becomes policy. So that is I think it works well for us. And again, what the president must then do is decide when to speak, how often, what tone to take, and how to make the most of those statements.
Thank you, Deborah. Lousene, Macaliko, or Lonita, did you want to comment on that, or would you like to wait until I ask them next?
The only thing I would add to it is that similar to what Deborah stated, the National Bar, like as National Bar Association president, I can only speak if we have policy for it. We have a lot of policy already. The flexibility that we have is that we don't have to wait until each of our meetings. We can call a special executive committee meeting that can give me the authority to speak on an issue that we don't already have policy on. But I just wanted to point out, I've seen instances where people are like, oh, well, I posted that in my personal capacity, not as president. And similar to what Deborah stated, I think I take the position that that's kind of a disingenuous take on when you're president of a national organization, because for this year, or I don't know how long everyone else's term, for this year, people know me as Lonita Baker, president of the National Bar Association. So while I'm normally active on social media, I mean, I was one of the attorneys for the family of Breonna Taylor. So I'm very active on social media. I'm very vocal on things that I feel strongly about. This year, I'm the president of the National Bar Association, and I have to always keep that in mind before I share certain stories or post certain things, because it is going to be taken as the position of my organization. And I think that as the fiduciary, we have to remember that and not get so loose with, well, it's my personal page. Yeah, your personal page is your president's page too. You don't have separate, even if you do have separate pages, you're still and so just go. But as the leader, I think that we do have a sense of persuasion over our organization to get the policies that we need to be passed, as Tara talked about Saba doing, like to get that policy passed. And that's what we do as leaders, is to make sure that we're influencing the policy that is being implemented.
Thank you. Lousene or Macaliko?
I just thought I'd add one other thing. I'm a little differently situated, maybe, in the sense that, while the LGBTQ plus bar is by no means monolithic, on an issue like, for instance, the Dobbs decision that came up recently, there are certain issues that are fairly settled in our organization, and the numbers and emanations from the Bill of Rights that Justice Douglas identified protect our community's rights to marriage, family, basic reproductive health care, and we, and so those things are important to us. So right after Dobbs, we issued a public statement, that we support the health and dignity and autonomy for all pregnant people. But, another key thing is that our, community members, a lot of the folks who access abortion and abortion providers also provide culturally competent care to trans folks and other members of our community. And one thing I was going to say is that, our organization has both a foundation and an association. And so it's good to be a little bit thoughtful. If you are, dipping your toe into the realms of advocacy, I think with bar associations, think a little bit at least about, the tax obligations you might have, how you might split out funding and make sure that you're doing things appropriately and not overstepping any boundaries.
Thank you. Macaliko? Otherwise, I'll ask you.
I just thought I'd underscore what Lonita shared. Like, I love the balance that everyone actually has contributed between governance, so that you have, because we're leaders of associations, right? And so the members, we're here to serve the members, and the members became members because they were bought in on the mission. And then, as a practical matter, like as Judge Clarke was saying, our members are all eligible to join lots of bars. So I don't know, as a practical matter, if they're actually digging into our governance when they make a decision as to whether or not they're going to be a part of it. But they do probably assume that there is a responsible, reasonable governance process that we go through, so that when we speak, it's well grounded in something that members could agree, think makes sense. And also it's just not a shooting from the hip individuals thing. And then at the same time, I also like how Lonita surfaced, though, we're just like any other elected folks, in the sense that, like, not everyone agreed to vote for us, right? In most organizations, we went through an elected process. Not every single member voted for us. Actually, I think it's kind of odd if they did, because that would tell you that maybe there's, that might be an issue of org health. And so I also don't want people as leaders to kind of leave behind any of their influencing power, because you were elected by a majority of your voting members because they saw in you the ability to lead the organization, and not just as a project manager, right? And so I think a lot of the work, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on what your jam is administrative and project management. That's certainly true in my bar. But really, you're here because you have a point of view that inspired people as to what should be for our community. And so I think, I just wouldn't be like, my personal encouragement is not to be so like dependent upon governance and sort of, I don't have a point of view, right? Because you are elected because people believe that you had a point of view that was worth listening to. Yeah.
Can I just add to that? You brought up a good point, because the other thing is, you cannot assume is that all of your members understand how the governance and the policy, or not how, but what they are, what the governance requirements are, what the policies. I don't think you can assume that all of your members know them, although you would think they would. I think at a minimum, you can expect they would know what the mission statement of the organization is, but I don't know that you can rely on all of them understanding or knowing what the governance policies and et cetera are of the leadership and the fiduciary duty of the leadership. And sometimes that can present issues between leadership and the organization. But that is something that you have to think about, it is how to educate the entire membership as to what those requirements are.
Can I shout out 2 quick points, Judge?
Yeah.
So one, I know Sandra had to leave, so I just want to give NAPABA a shout out, because they are really good at this, in my experience. So I'm a member of their bar. I try to be a member of actually all my sister bars, because I learn a lot and I care. So anyways, I get the emails from NAPABA, and when they have to make tough decisions, controversial decisions, I have noticed that it is their habit to send actually a pretty thorough, thoughtful memo to their listserv, so that their members understand the deliberations that were involved, how they weighed it out, and how they got to that outcome, which, I just think that's gold standard. The other thing that I think, when we've got, this kind of audience, 183 people listening, and I hope hundreds more later on the YouTube, not everyone's going to be the head of the bar, right? Like, that's going to actually be a pretty small percentage of our membership. And I really want the message to be that everybody is, that said, so deeply empowered. Like, when I think about this governance process, what we're really describing is so many ways in which our members are going to influence how we come out, and also how much we depend upon, as people in that officer's level, we depend upon the members to help us get that right, because we are a members association. So one of the messages I always say to Native attorneys, it's like, our bar in particular, we're so small relative to a lot of probably most of the bars on this call. It's like, don't feel like this is this insurmountable institution. Like, raise your hand, come into it. If you're facing barriers, come and talk to us. And that's the other thing, is like, I bet that the women on this call, if members in your associations came to you and said, I really care about this, and I feel like I've hit a wall, I don't understand how to make my voice and my knowledge in this area heard, we would help them. So I think that's the other thing too, is just telling people, like, not everyone has time, interest, or all kinds of barriers to being the head. If you want to do that, I think people like us are here to help you get there. But we're also here to help the majority of people who could contribute in these other ways. And we won't be successful unless we have that kind of engagement. So everybody is really deeply empowered.
Thank you, Makalika. Okay, we have about 15 minutes left. So I'm going to take a few questions. I've been perusing the questions in the Q&A as you all have been talking. And there's one that there's one question about mentors, and the person, I'm not going to read the question exactly, but the basic premise of the question is it seems to be difficult for women to get mentors, that there's a shortage of mentors is what this person is saying. And so can you address how there are so many different ways that women can be mentored, and what does it really mean to have a mentor, and how do you go about finding someone who can assist you in navigating a particular path? Who haven't I heard from in a while? Tara, were you sort of ready to go?
I can definitely go. I actually have to leave exactly in 13 minutes, but I will say that I think the challenge is that people have defined mentorship in a very specific way. I think we think of mentors as someone that's ahead of us in our career path that can give us advice on the specific issues that we think we need at that time. What I've found is if you expand the definition of mentor and you think about mentorship as ever changing in your career and ever changing in, your ascent to whatever position that you may have, you'll find that you might have a mentor who's younger, who's in a different race, cultural background, whatever it may be. Some of the most effective mentors I've had have been people that are younger than me that have just somehow advanced in their career in a different way than I have. And I think if you expand your definition of mentorship, I don't think there is a shortage of mentors. I think there's a shortage in your definition of what mentorship is. That's my personal.
Thank you, Tara. Lonita, go ahead.
Yeah. I think people are afraid of the word mentor. When people come to you and ask you, will you be my mentor? You're like, yeah. But I think to Tara's point of, I give advice all day long to I can't say your name, Makalika. Nope, I didn't say it right. I'm gonna get it though. But to her point of making sure that people within our organization feel welcome and that you're grooming them to, like, I tell people, oh, well, even if you don't get involved in the big board, you can go be a member of the corporate law section or the employment law section. We have sections to everyone. So you get antsy when people ask you to be their mentor because you're like, well, what does that detail? But if it's just an email, a phone call, like friendship, like a friendship, many of my friends are my mentors. So I think, Tara's correct, like expand the definition of mentor, but I say just lose the word mentor altogether and just start asking people questions and they never know. Like some people are my mentors, probably don't even know that I go around telling people, oh, that's my mentor. Because I've never asked them to be my mentor. I just start asking them questions and they answer. And so hence they're my mentor.
That is exactly right. People, there was a time, especially in law firms, where there were formal mentorship programs and it felt very formal. And then you're like, well, what do I do? We'll take your mentor to lunch or talk to them. Then it started to feel almost like a chore. Whereas if mentors can be at every level, and you can be both a mentor and a mentee, and you should embrace both roles. And so I think for me, as the president of the ABA, when people ask me all the time, can I talk to you about something? I always find the time. I don't know how, but I find the time, whether it's a 10-minute Zoom or 15-minute Zoom. What I can't do is when people send me an email with 15 questions. I can't answer that. I just can't do that. So what I will do is say, call me. And it's fine. I can give you 5 minutes. I can give you 10 minutes. I can answer your questions. And then I can always say, if you've got other questions, come back to me. So I think it is, I love the idea, lose the mentor, mentee, lose those titles, and just talk to people on a human level, and you will find that you will get the support that you will need. You will get the answers that you need, and be specific. I find I'm much more helpful when people come to me with specific things that they want to know. How did you do this? Or why did you take this path? What was it like working there? That's easy for me to answer, and it's easy for me to be able to then help that person along.
Thank you, Deborah. Did we hear from you, Toni, already?
I think that it's been said, but really,
okay.
The title is that's a non-starter, because it has certain connotations, and then over my career, people have tried to have formalized mentorship situations, and sometimes it's just you don't even have the personality that matches the person that they've assigned to you as your mentor or mentee. So I think in terms of someone who's looking for someone, lose the term, but look for someone within your organization that sort of has done things that you want to do, or has practiced the type of law that you think you might be interested in, and just reach out to that person and say, hey, can I ask you a couple of questions? And going to bar conferences is a great place to make that happen, because you can just grab them in the hall and say, hey, want to get a cup of coffee, or do you have a minute? I mean, that's how a lot of it happens. And so don't look for the more formal way of that relationship. Just reach out. And many of us are, we're not shy about giving answers or giving some guidance as to where you might find the answers. We don't know the answer.
Lousene, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I 100% agree with everyone what they said on mentorship, and that should be like an abundant resource, like almost unlimited, right? And that we should give as much as we are able, and take advantage of when other people are offering that to us. I will say, I think in my career, for instance, and I try to do my best to think about this and perpetuate it where I can. But there have been people, I don't know, sponsorship maybe used to be a word people started using for it. But there is a special role for people who took a particular interest in me and said, you should try for this leadership position. Don't discount yourself. You should come along with me, and I will show you how to do something, that helped advance me to get to where I got. And I think it's incumbent on all of us as women leadership. And I said, time is always limited, but, and that's the challenge, but to take a look for those opportunities and make sure that we're paying that forward and giving those opportunities as we see them to other women who are coming after us.
Makalika, did you want to comment on that question at all?
I love the pivot to sponsorship, because I think sometimes when people are asking about mentorship, they're actually really talking about sponsorship. And they're really saying, like, where are the people who have the willingness, but also the power, frankly, to help me? And how do I find those people? And so one of the things that I hope we are doing as women get these opportunities to hold power is just encouraging more focus for women who achieve power to share that power. Because what I really hope the narrative is that by every time you empower a woman, you allow her to accumulate power that she's then going to plant like seeds with many other people, men and women, right, across the board. Like I'm somebody who's like very nerdy and data driven about all of my work, and that includes in this space in DEI. I have done an audit where I actually sat down and I wrote down every person that I thought since kindergarten that I can remember has really driven, like, had a powerful impact. Maybe sponsor is the right word. So who were my sponsors who really made a difference? And then I did best guess analysis as to what the demographics are of that group. And it is vast majority people of color, and much more women than men, right? So that to me was such a powerful insight to have. And then I have flipped it, and I have done an accounting to hold myself accountable and said, who am I investing in? And what does that look like? And what's the demographics? And so I really hold myself accountable, and it's not hard to do because I love it. I have a lot of joy. Like I I think there's a problem if I'm not invested in diverse people, and I'm probably not having as much fun if that group isn't as diverse. So to me, like, the message is also that this is really no burden, but it is a behavioral shift to like hold yourself accountable. And I've said to this to people before, you don't need to share your list. If you ask me, I probably will, because I understand that examples are a way that people learn. And so I probably will do that for you, but you don't have to share it, right? This accountability that we do is not always a public exercise, but I do encourage people to think about that, really say, like, was I a good investment of power? Why was it a good investment to put power in me? Like, how did I perpetuate power in communities that I asked to be empowered with, to empower, right? Like when I went to law school, I mean, I made this huge career shift about 18 months ago out of a very corporate practice for lots of reasons, but it really is a shift into very directly helping my community. And when I went to law school, I wrote an essay that said, please invest in me, please empower me with this fancy degree, because I represent this unempowered community. And I'm promising that if you do that, I'm going to put that power back into my community. And so I'm here fulfilling that promise, right? And so I just think that's one of the things that we need to be talking about too. It's not so much like, I think it's important that we're telling people who are rising up the ranks what they should do, but I think it's equally important that as those of us who have been historically underrepresented and unempowered achieve power, that we're talking amongst ourselves about how are we being good investments with that power.
So we have 2 minutes left, and I want to say that I absolutely love the way you've closed the circle, Makalika, because we started out this conversation with, how did you all get your power? And what you're closing it with is, we also have an obligation to give it to other people. And how do we do that? And maybe that's our next webinar, because I think it's a really, really important comment. And thank you for making that at the end. I had hoped that we had time to go around and give everybody an opportunity to say one last comment, but it's been such a great and invigorating conversation that we have 2 minutes left. I want to remind everyone that if you have friends that weren't able to attend today, that this will be shown on the ABA Commission on Women in the Professions website. And we're also providing the link to the other bar associations that are represented on this Zoom call today. And so your members will be able to also see it. I want to thank our panelists. You all are such amazing women. I wish I was in on those quarterly conversations and meetings that you have, because there are so many great things that are coming out of this group. You are powerful, you are amazing, and you are, just by your very active leadership, giving power to every other woman with whom you come in contact to in this profession. So thank you so very much. In the 30 seconds I have left, I'd just like to remind everyone that the ABA Commission on Women in the Professions Margaret Brent Award Ceremony, where you can hear from more powerful women, is happening at the ABA annual meeting on Sunday, August 6th. It's an opportunity for us to give awards to 5 women who have assisted in advancing other women in the profession. It's always a really exciting event. I hope that you'll be able to join us at that August 6th event. If you need any information, I always point people to Ashley. I hope she has hundreds of people contacting her about this. But thank you all so very much. We just hit the 3 o'clock hour, and we're going to have to conclude. Thank you to all the attendees. Thank you, folks.